Hey, it's Dr. Jensen with Module 2, Crime, Criminality, and the Media Part 5. So we're getting close to the end of our lectures for this module, and this is where we're going to pair social learning theory a little more directly with Surratt's work on media and crime, and I think create a better fit for explaining how media and crime go together. So by way of review, social learning theory is a theory by Ron Akers, who was here at University of Florida for a long time. He's professor emeritus now, but a very, very famous criminologist, and we've been so fortunate to have him here in the department, and it's a very successful theory. So Akers' work, social learning theory, is a general theory of human behavior which integrates Edwin Sutherland's differential association theory with learning principles from psychology. So it kind of blends sociology and psychology together a little bit. It's very highly influenced by some of the work of Bandera and Skinner, and sometimes you see these kinds of ideas come forward in early childhood development classes and trying to motivate kids to be compliant. So you'll see that come up. It's a broad enough theory to incorporate rational choice and deterrence theories, and also use those imitation and modeling themes we've talked about in this module. What's nice about social learning theory is it doesn't spend too much time on race, gender, social class, or social structure. So it applies to everyone, no matter if you're high income or low income, if you're male or female, if you live in a nice neighborhood or a poor one, how much education you have. So it tends to be highly predictive no matter what those other traits are. So it's a very strong theory in criminology. But to understand it, we need to do a little bit of review of differential association. So this is kind of a famous tipping of the scales illustration on differential association. So on one side of the scale, we have ideas that prohibit crime, that keep us from being criminals. So playing fair, don't be a bully, forgive and forget, turn the other cheek, evil is always punished, they'll get what's coming to them, and honesty is the best policy. On the other side of the scale, we have ideas that justify crime. Drinking is okay, everybody does it, the end justifies the means, I don't get mad, I get even, don't let anyone push you around, and people should be able to take drugs if they want to. So it's a different set of ideas or associations we have about maybe the same behavior, and you can take these two different perspectives. He has 9 principles of differential association theory, which Akers used to develop his theory. So let's take a look. Differential association theory, we abbreviate it as DAT, has these 9 principles or propositions that explain the process of the transmission of these ideas or values that are criminal. So the first one is that criminal behavior is learned and not inherited. So there is no crime gene that is passed on from mother to child. It's a process of learning. Criminal behavior is also learned in interaction with other persons in a process of communication, and it can be verbal or gestured or nonverbal. So it's through an interactive process. The third is that the learning of criminal behavior occurs within intimate personal groups, because that's our primary way of learning things and making decisions on how to act, what to say, who to be. That learning includes techniques of committing the crime, the special direction or motives, the drives, rationalizations, and the attitudes necessary to carry it out. So it's going to come all together in that package. The specific direction of the motives and the drives is learned from definitions of the legal codes as favorable and unfavorable. So you're going to kind of translate the law as it applies to you. 6, a person becomes delinquent because of an excess of definitions favorable to law violations. So this is again where we rationalize why this event needs to happen. 7, differential associations vary in frequency, how often they happen, duration, how long they are, priority, how important they are, and intensity, how emotional they are. So as they become more frequent, longer, more important, more emotional, they're going to have a lot higher impact on us and be a lot bigger part of us turning to criminal behavior. The process of learning criminal behavior by association with criminal and non-criminal patterns involves all the same mechanisms involved in any other learning. So it's not unique to criminal behavior. These same principles apply to learning to ride a bike, to learning how to get along with your boss, to learning how to fix a car engine. It's all the same kinds of mechanisms. And then 9, finally, while criminal behavior is an expression of general needs and values, it's not explained by those general needs and values, because otherwise we'd all be doing it. We'd all be committing crime. But this just shows us the process by which it happens. So when we pull this back into media and we look at media's role in learning, note the implications of these statements. So the media may influence both the conforming and the criminal behavior to reinforce why we should act the way we should, and teach techniques as well as motivations and attitudes. And so we can watch videos of people and how they react, and then ask ourselves, would I react that way? Or is their action justified? How do I feel about it? But the media are distant. They are really not intimate, and those intimate social groups are key, which are not the most influential in the learning process. So learning is much more powerful and salient when it's through someone that you are familiar and intimate with. Media, we kind of don't feel close to, and we can separate from things that matter a little bit more to us. So we should expect that media effects are relatively weak, and we may want to see how intimate groups actually mediate the communications. So they are the stronger factor. As far as media exposure to crime, that exposure varies by what we call modalities of association. So again, we talked about this: frequency of exposure, duration of exposure, priority of exposure, and intensity, where the exposure occurs. Okay, so we can look at that media exposure, and if you're watching the same crime show over and over and over again, then you're getting high frequency. If you're spending a lot of time doing it, it takes up most of your day. If it's something you look forward to, the most important part of your day, and if you feel very emotionally attached to it, then yeah, we might see some effects from that. However, there are 2 problems with Sutherland's theory. So those learning mechanisms through which these definitions and the exposure to the definitions occur was really not articulated. We have some of the process by which it happens, but we don't have the details we need to be able to recognize when it is happening and when it is not happening. So it's a little vague on that front. The second problem is the measurement problem, and a lot of theories have this issue: how to count all these definitions to see which exposures were greatest, and how many do we have to finally be pushed over into criminal behavior. Because we can have association of these definitions and decide we don't want to do it. So think about it this way. You may know someone that had a highly alcoholic parent, and there were experiences and episodes with that parent that were very unpleasant. Maybe they had to lie to their parent's boss because the parent was too hungover to come to work, and they said, oh, they're just not feeling well today, and really they're covering an alcohol problem. Maybe they had to clean up the vomit on the floor when they come home kind of slobbering away from the bar. Maybe they experienced some violence or neglect because of some of those alcoholic episodes. So they could have a lot of activity and behavior that says, I am not going to be a drinker. I don't want to get into these problems. I don't want to do it. But you could have that same person end up becoming an alcoholic, right? So we have to go, okay, so what were they exposed to? Was it an intimate social group? What did they learn? Did they learn to do it or not to do it? And so measuring how all these things happen can get very, very complicated. And we don't have a good prescription for that. However, we do have a solution. So Ron Akers and his social learning theory addresses those problems. So he uses modeling and operant conditioning to really specify the learning process and nail down those mechanisms a little bit better. He posits that the differential associations with the definitions and groups that expose us to different models will reinforce and punish contingencies that shape our behavior, for the better or for the worse. And the learned definitions really serve as an important cue to discriminative stimuli for operant conditioning. So he says these cues are really important as reinforcers of whether we're going to do something or not. So let's kind of go into the core constructs of the theory. The first core construct is operant conditioning, which allows for differential reinforcement and punishment as the behavior changes or is adjusted. The second is imitation and modeling of the behavior. The third is definitions, verbal and nonverbal behaviors about what's good and bad, right and wrong, useful and not useful. And then finally, differential association with others and definitions. So again, just another way of looking at reinforcement. So first, operant conditioning is reinforcement occurs when the consequences of behavior occur in the presence of cues, or we call them discriminative stimuli. We can recognize them, that make it more likely for the behavior to occur in the presence of those cues in the future. So think of it this way. You go to a party and you're getting all kinds of party cues on what's acceptable and not acceptable in this environment. And every party might be a little different. Can you be loud? Can you be rowdy? Are we all watching a movie, listening to music? Can you dance at this party? Are we staying inside or outside? Which groups should I interact with? Which ones are having the most fun? Are people making out in the corner? I don't know. What is party behavior that I should be participating in or avoiding? So we're looking for cues as to how we should act. And when we are in the presence of these cues, we get positive and negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is pleasant stimuli that occur after behaving in the presence of the cues. We get happy. So maybe we start participating in those party behaviors and we get signals from other people that, yeah, this is fun. This is working and you're not only enjoying yourself, but you're being accepted by other people in the room of the party. And that's going to make you want to continue to do it and maybe do it more. You also have negative reinforcement. Those are the unpleasant stimuli. They're removed after behaving in the presence of the cues. And so maybe you start dancing and then suddenly the party changes and people are looking at you and staring going, why are you dancing? It's social awkwardness. We start receiving ideas and reinforcers that say that's not okay, or you're embarrassing yourself, you shouldn't be doing that. And that reinforces us not to do it. So a little bit more on operant conditioning. The punishment occurs when consequences of a behavior in the presence of cues or those stimuli make it less likely for the behavior to occur in the presence of those cues in the future. So let's say at the party, we saw a lot of people smoking pot. And we hadn't really had much experience with it before, and so it looked acceptable and exciting, and so we thought we'd try it. So we smoke pot, we get a little high, we feel really good, we get some free pot, we get, all that kind of stuff going on. But what if we used pot and we didn't feel great? It's very common, especially for first-time pot smokers, to feel a little bit sick to their stomach and get kind of an upset stomach because they don't know what they're doing, and not have a great experience the first time they smoke pot because they don't know the techniques of how to do it and how to get high or how to wait for it. And so it's a very awkward, kind of choking, nasty sensation. So the positive punishment would be that unpleasant stimuli occurring in the behavior, the presence of the cues. So we go, well, this is acceptable behavior, but I don't like it. Then you have negative punishment, or pleasant stimuli are removed after behaving in the presence of the cues. Okay, so maybe we put the pot away, but then, we almost have like withdrawal, like, oh man, it's not as fun anymore. You take something I wanted away from me. I don't like it. The fun goes away. So there are different ways to get someone to motivate themselves to do something. Take away something they want, give them something that they're looking for, don't deliver on a promise, show them how awkward it is or unacceptable it is to do something. And all of these different things are reinforcers. Again, kind of positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment. So deterrence theory really operates on punishment principles too, thinking if the punishment is certain, swift, and severe, that you'll never do it again. But it doesn't always happen that way. Imitation and modeling. You're learning by seeing or hearing others. And there are two ways in which it happens. We have vicarious reinforcement, where we see how others are reinforced and punished to learn to associate behaviors with cues to maximize their rewards. So you're kind of watching other people, seeing what they're getting out of it, and seeing if it is in your best interest. The second one is cognitive organization. You just kind of putting your information together in your head from everything you're observing to figure things out and come to the conclusion that you should do this. So one is kind of self-directed, the other one is kind of observing others. And then finally, definitions. You have those verbal and nonverbal behaviors about good and bad, right and wrong, useful, not useful. And these are learned via operant conditioning and imitation, just like any other behavior. And they serve as important cues or stimuli to which behaviors become paired. So again, if we're at the party and we're dancing and we're feeling great, as we see those cues again, maybe even in a separate setting or environment, we're going to associate dancing as appropriate and fun and something we'll enjoy. And so we might say, when I see this behavior that suggests dancing, then I'm going to dance. Those are going to be paired. Or if I see people smoking pot and I had a negative experience smoking pot, then I'm going to pair those two together and say, well, I'm going to avoid that because I remember that upset stomach I got last time and I didn't like that. So again, we pair the stimuli, the experiences to behaviors, and that becomes kind of our decision tree when we make decisions about if we're going to do it. These are reinforced by those consequences following formulating the definition. And as cues, they really play a different role in this theory with Akers rather than Sutherland's theory. You don't have to count them, they just have to be present. So it's a lot easier to measure and observe this in action when we see people behaving in different ways, and it goes beyond criminality. So again, social learning theory encompasses criminal and conforming behavior, initiating deviant behavior, desistance and cessation of problem behaviors, even self-help behaviors. So people trying to improve their lives or be more pro-social or do different things that are for their best interest. You can use it for that too. And realize that differential association and social learning theory are consistently the strongest predictors of behavior in the research literature, and I'll actually show you the evidence here. So where the theory stands, this comes from a criminological theory book, graduate level book. So it says, okay, we have these social learning theories by Sutherland and Akers. Their concepts are definitions and reinforcement and imitation. They're proposing that you get deviant, criminal, and conforming behavior from a social learning process depending on the balance and direction of what's inside the theory. And the empirical validity is what I want you to pay attention to. Moderate to strong, and a very large body of research that have tested it in different crimes, different contexts, different places, different people over time. So it's a very, very strong theory, and one that I kind of wish Surratt would have used in his book. So just for fun, if this theory is true and it really is highly explanatory of crime, well, how do we use it? Well, how do we put it into action? What are the main policy implications? And you look at it, it means we got to approach crime with cognitive behavioral treatment, prevention, and intervention programs with individuals, families, peers, and groups. So we have to intermediate those thought processes, those emotions, and those associations, and get people to recognize them and to understand the fact that they're experiencing cues to that behavior. So sometimes I had these experiences when I worked in drug court. I occasionally had clients that had certain shirts that they would wear when they wanted to go out and get high or go drinking with their buddies, a certain cologne or perfume they would wear when they would do it. And they said if they picked out that shirt or wore that fragrance getting ready to go out for the evening, it kind of was this cue to wanting to go use or go drink. And so we had to help them recognize, you know, those cues in their lives and say, you know what, that's a reinforcer. You like that shirt, you look good in it, but if that's your drinking shirt or your drug using shirt, it might be just too tempting to follow through on that cue and go pick up drugs or alcohol and relapse. So we might need to rethink some of these things going on in your closet or on your nightstand. Just kind of rounding off things. So what are the implications of this theory for media and crime? It is relevant and it does matter, but we have to keep a few things in mind. So media, again, is a little too distant to be a major direct cause of behaviors, but it still matters. We can still identify it and it still plays a role. Media exposes us to definitions and can teach us techniques as well as motivations, rationalizations for doing it, and attitudes we have, but again, they aren't quite as powerful as those taught person to person. Media as communications merchants do expose us to these things, which then may be modeled and reinforced and punished, but the effective models and sources of reinforcement will be your friends and your family. Those are those intimate social groups. So the media impacts to be mediated are really by these closer groups and not just media alone. Although more and more, especially with social media, we're finding people feeling highly connected with strong social networks and ties to people that aren't very close in proximity to them. They can feel understood, they can feel reached out to and connecting with others. So again, it's not quite as intense or maybe even as meaningful, but it is there and it's developing, and that's something that we're kind of keeping track of over time. So hopefully you find this useful, and this is the end of your mini tour of social learning theory as it applies to media and crime.